the next piece of the second session is we're going to be talking about the route to market and funding a product. We have a couple of other speakers that are going to be talking. So we have Asha Mistry, who is in the Leicester Innovation Hub, and also Lewis Stringer from the British Business Bank. Helen was also going to be giving a short talk on this, but I'm going to be taking over from her slide. So they're still in there just as a name memoir to myself. But what I'd just like to sort of do and paint a picture of how us as the LSA can actually facilitate the development of resilience and wellbeing products, and actually defining the route to market, and most of all actually routes to funding, and actually how you can drive those products to market. So I know this is a little bit sort of abstract, but I think it's always good to sort of have a think about sort of technology readiness levels and how it links with innovation. So very much sort of TRLs were actually defined by NASA when they were developing the Apollo space program to take people to the moon, but it was really sort of a very low TRL level. So TRL 1 is the idea or of an invention, and then actually as you progress through to TRL 9, that's actually once you've got an idea to market. Now, the concept of innovation is sort of links around sort of the three domains that are presented here. So we've got TRL 1 to 3 is sort of around research and innovation. Research and invention. TRLs 4 to 7 is sort of around the innovation, and then TRL 8 to 9 is actually getting it to commercial market, so actually getting the product out there. I wanted to just sort of link this with innovation, because I know people define innovation in different ways, and people can look at different products, different services, whether it's online or different products. But really, in the LSA, we define innovation as either incremental, so that's improving an existing product. So that might be if you had a car, improving the engine to make it more economical, producing more power, or disruptive by potentially introducing an electric car or say an everlasting battery per se. And both of these can be complementary to each other. So sometimes you can repurpose something that is incremental in one sector, and actually it can be disruptive in another. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but where this very much links, because if you are wanting to sort of get a product to market, you do need to sort of think about, is it an incremental innovation? Are there a lot of competitors out there, or does it have the potential to disrupt? So what are the things about getting innovations to the market and commercialize them? So generally, incremental innovation have the lowest risk, because it's really just improving what's already out there. So consumers are used to these products. Disruptive innovation is the highest risk. Like if you think maybe sort of 15, 20 years ago, having a camera phone was really obscure. Why would you need a phone and a camera put together? Now every single phone is produced with a camera, and pocket cameras and SLRs, their sales have decreased. But very much the sort of the route to market is sort of defining, once you've sort of got through the invention stage and you've actually made a prototype and you've got sort of you've undertaken sort of the market assessment, it's how do you commercialize that to actually get it from sort of the TRL 6 to the TRL 8 level. Now, there is a concept that many of you will know or may not be aware of, and that's called the Valley of Death. And that's basically taking an idea and then getting it to market, because a lot of ideas get to the sort of the TRL 6 level, but they fail. Now, one of the ways that you can get around that is actually by de-risking, and actually one of the ways to de-risk is by working with the LSA. So we can work with companies to sort of navigate you away from the Valley of Death, and in a hope, accelerate your innovation products, and most of all, actually signposting the routes to funding to further develop them. And actually, because as you are developing a product, there is a lot of cash burn, and the way that we can do that, as I've already shown in a slide earlier, is actually giving you the access to experts, navigating the sort of environment, whether it's regulatory advice and funding, or actually collaboration through the product service development or wider collaborative funding. The next few slides are going to be presented by Helen, but I'm going to be presenting those. But very much to actualize your ideas and to get it out to market, you need an idea of what funding is available, because most likely you'll use some of your own money to actually drive the innovation funding, but at some point you'll either need to look for, say, Innovate UK funding, VC, crowdsource funding, and it can be quite complicated. So for people that are not subject matter experts on this, it is very complicated, and it's actually forever changing. So the funding environment in the UK may be different from Europe, from the US, and actually how different markets operate as well. So I'm not going to do a deep dive into these, but the best thing I could say is if you are wanting help, and it is to come and talk to us at the LSA, because we are the knowledge experts on this. And with all of these, there are different risks. So some could be lower risk, some can be higher, but it's very much dependent on the product or the service that you're wanting to develop. One of the things that we are able to support, and that is actually within an industrial MPhil, that can actually look at de-risking. So this is actually where a company does get so if you have an innovation project, we can actually get an MPhil student to actually work on that project for a year. So that would actually be able to take it from a concept to actually undertaking that and getting that to early market readiness. I can give further information around that, and a number of my colleagues are experts in this, but it's really a collaboration between the business, the student, and the academic supervisor. And we have a number of companies with industrial MPhils in place already, and so far it's been very, very successful because you have access to the academic, but you also have a student that they're living and breathing the product development, so they'll become a subject matter expert in that. And most likely, once they've completed that, they will probably become a good member of your team. There's also knowledge transfer partnerships as well. These are more extensive, so they can be between 1 and 3 years. And they are directly aimed at sort of commercializing innovations. So these are, I'd say, a deeper level of program. And we also have a number of KTPs that we're facilitating at the University of Leicester, both with SMEs and larger organisations. KTPs have been around for 20 years, and they are probably the blue ribbon standard for Innovate UK, and actually driving knowledge exchange and accelerating innovation. And these are very, very successful. So further, if you want to know more information, please come to me. And what I'd just like to say is the funding landscape is forever changing now. There are open calls where you can, so if there's an Innovate UK Smart Grant, for example, you could apply, but within that you may be getting sort of applications for improving water quality, and or there's more specific calls that are aligned to the theme. So say resilience and wellbeing, as can be seen with the dementia call. Now, to navigate around this, unless you're an expert, it can be quite complicated, and there are positives and negatives to sort of different applications. But what I'd like to say is that we can actually steer you and signpost you to what you'd need to do for an application. But then also with some of these funding calls, it has to be part of sort of wider collaborative funding. So the innovation projects that you can do via our smart projects would actually facilitate the application for these. Now, if Ash is on the call, I'd just like to give her a few moments just to talk about the Leicester Accelerator. So,
hi everyone, thank you, James.
Thank you.
Just a quick one from me. We have recently been awarded funding by the UK government, part of the Community Renewal Fund, part of the government's Levelling Up agenda. And this is allowing us to expand our current sustainability offer here at the Leicester Innovation Hub. The project will be called the Leicester Accelerator, and we're in the process of getting it wrapped up and you know, kick-started in the new year. The reason I'd like to speak today is to ask if anybody in the audience or within your networks, if you have any companies that you're working with or you yourself are interested in developing a decarbonisation plan, you're working towards net zero, or you'd like to work towards net zero, If you need support and help, we will have support available. We already do, but we'll be expanding our offer. And if you are Leicester based, then that is specifically what we're looking for. And we'll have a range of support on offer. So that's sustainability audit training, that is carbon literacy training to kind of teach and provide you with the knowledge to kind of go forward in your business and integrate sustainability within that. We'll also have graduate placements and student placements. So we'll be able to put students and graduates into your business and work on a specific project specifically to do with sustainability or any other challenges you may be facing. We are specifically working with Leicester City-based businesses, but if you are located elsewhere in the East Midlands, there are similar programs from the same fund across Derby, Nottingham, and others. So if you don't qualify for Leicester, there is other similar projects available. And if you are interested in leveling up your own sustainability agenda or net zero agenda or low carbon agenda, whatever you'd like to call it, then please get in touch with myself or the team at the usual email address, and I will put that in the chat for you. So thank you.
Thanks, Asha. We will be sharing the email address and contact details at the end of the session, so please feel free to reach out to us or pose any questions in the chat. I'd just like to invite Lewis Stringer up now, please, because he's got a short presentation around sort of the British Business Bank and how they can sort of facilitate innovation. So, Lewis, do you want to take control?
I've got 11 slides and probably 3 or 4 minutes, so let's rush through them, but I'm hoping the slides will come out to you as well. So in terms of the British Business Bank, just to come back to James's slides, I guess, we probably sit in the later stage of the TRL setup. So we are probably more focused on the commercial marketplace. I work for the British Business Bank. We are government's economic development bank. Our mission is to drive sustainable growth, prosperity across the UK, transition to net zero by improving access to finance for smaller businesses. So we're all about improving the access to debt and equity funding for small businesses across the UK. Thank you, James. So who are we? As I said, we are government's economic development bank. We are 100% owned by you. Most of our funding, not all of it, comes from taxpayer. We don't directly lend or invest in businesses. We do so through what we call delivery partners, and they range from the likes of NatWest to smaller, more localised funders and fund managers. And the way that we do that is to ensure that we channel funding into market gaps, market failure, state aid areas, to get more of those small businesses funded that wouldn't necessarily buy commercial funders without that support, guarantee, wholesale funding, etc. Thank you, James. So we have 7 key objectives. We added the net zero objective earlier this year. And again, you'll see that there's a whole range of objectives in terms of putting more money into the SME marketplace, but also addressing regional disparities in access to finance, particularly for small businesses. And that's a particular issue for our region, the East Midlands and Leicester in particular. And we do that through a whole host of mechanisms, which I'll explain a bit later on. But we also do that by the education piece, because again, it's not just about the supply of finance. It's also making sure that SMEs are aware of the various finance options, and we'll come on to a later slide for that. Thank you, James. So the next slide, hopefully that'll come up, will explain that sort of life cycle stage that James touched on, but in a slightly different way. We have a number of debt solution programs. There's no reason why you should know most of the names for these. But what we do is we identify gaps, market failure, work with government policymakers, but then go out to the marketplace to look at the best ways of actually addressing those gaps. And we call programs in various names that you don't need to worry about, with 1 or 2 exceptions. The first of those is startup loans. And startup loans, as the name suggests, are loans for startup businesses in the early stage, normally lend on a personal basis, but also reflect the fact that high streets marketplace doesn't typically lend to startup businesses. And then we move as the value of the lending increases and the risk decreases because the businesses are more established, into some structural programs, which are all about putting money into the marketplace, increasing the finance options through various alternative funders, some of which James has already mentioned. So a lot of the stuff that we've been doing over the last 5 to 10 years has been changing the finance market dynamic for small businesses, so we're less reliant on high street lenders. Thank you, James. Similar graph, hopefully, for equity solutions. There we go. Value of investment increases as the risk decreases and the business become more established. We don't tend to get involved in that R&D stage. We very much rely on partners such as Innovate UK and local grant pots. We start to get involved from the seed stage onwards, and that can sometimes be pre-revenue activity. More recently, we've introduced something called the Regional Angel Programme. Angel investors are typically the area that will invest small amounts in very early stage businesses. And we're wholesale funding through a number of investment vehicles and business angel networks. Our main focus tends to be on early stage equity investment, and we have a whole range of programs that deliver that. More recently, and this is particularly pertinent to the life sciences sector, we've realised that it's not just a matter of doing that early stage investment in the market, but for some sectors, for some technologies, we almost need to follow that funding through. So we've set up a number of commercial entities, one of which is British Patient Capital, to continue to do those funding rounds beyond that initial first early stage round. Thank you, James. So, we generally tend to be sector agnostic. We tend to do the early stage lending and investing, and therefore we don't want to restrict it too much from a sectoral point of view. But we do acknowledge that life sciences sector more generically has particular issues which make it difficult to invest in, obviously. Tend to be a more significant number of rounds, early stage, the customer clients, regulatory validation is often longer by comparison to a lot of other sectors, and therefore will require larger sums of money over a longer period of time. We've recognised that, so from a departure from that agnostic approach to delivery, we've recently launched the Life Sciences Investment Programme. That will be a wholesale programme where we'll go out and get specialist life sciences fund managers cornerstone funds that they set up to specifically focus on the more positive, active, high growth potential life sciences businesses across the UK, so that their growth is not stunted, and probably as importantly, they don't have to go overseas for investment opportunities. Thank you, James. So I talked about that education piece. It's not just about supply finance. One of the biggest issues that we often come across, particularly in terms of early stage companies, is their knowledge of the various finance options that are available to them, what those finance options look for from a proposition, and how they can best prepare themselves. And James very kindly put investor readiness in the transition area between TRL levels later on. And I totally agree, investor readiness, investment readiness is very important. And therefore, if you take only one thing from my presentation, can you take this link for the Finance Hub? This is our information point on our website. It is independent and is increasingly very comprehensive. So this is a great tool for you if you're looking at funding options and looking to raise funding. Thank you, James. So what does actually that all mean, Lewis? So what it means is that through our core programs over the last 5 years, we've put now, these figures are to July this year, we put over £400 million worth of funding into early stage businesses across the region, now over 5,000 SMEs. What it also means is that in terms of the Startup Lens programme, that typically will invest and lend up to £10,000, but up to 25 as a maximum. We've now supported over 4,000 startup businesses through almost £40 million worth of startup loans. We have been heavily involved over the last 18 months on the various COVID-19 loan schemes, but also Future Fund, which was an equity type product. And in terms of the East Midlands, even though those schemes closed earlier this year, we supported almost 106,000 East Midlands businesses, offering almost £5 billion worth of guaranteed lending and equity support to those businesses. Thank you, James. I've brushed deliberately over the regional fund. You would have seen both in terms of the debt solutions and equity solutions. There was reference to a regional fund. Delighted to say the East Midlands, Leicester and Leicestershire has a regional fund called the Midlands Energy Investment Fund. It's recently, like a lot of our programmes, got excellent positive announcements in the budget. So actually that should now read 300 million. We're waiting for the formal letter from the Treasury. And we've also supported over £140 million worth of early stage equity and debt funding over and above the figures in the previous slide to businesses. What we've also been able to do is use the fund managers that we operate through to leverage additional funding. So in reality, double that total amount of money as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. So that's just a very quick whistle stop tour. Those are my contact details. I'll put them in the chat if I may do, James. Please contact me. We're always delighted to particularly work with the Leicester Innovation Hub. So again, the guys in that hub will know about us a little bit, hopefully, and can refer you separately if you don't have the confidence of approaching me. I know I'm a scary person at times. Thank you, James, and thank you for the opportunity of speaking this morning.
Thanks, Lewis. That was a brilliant presentation. Just give me one moment while I just change my screen. So I'd just like to say thank you to Lewis again. That was a brilliant overview of the British Business Bank and actually the funding avenues that are available. And as you can see from the few slides that I went through, there are many sort of funding avenues available, but also there's the support there and it's free. So I'd say very much go and speak to as many people as you can to actually sort of find the best solution to actually drive and actualize the ideas and innovations. Now, I'd like to invite it's time for the panel discussion and Q&A, and we have got a number of questions that have been coming in. So I'd like to invite John, Elizabeth, Torif is on the call, Andy, Linda, Peter, and yourself, Lewis, to join me in taking a few questions from the audience today. One of the first questions that we have got, and this is an open question to all speakers, and it's how has the pandemic affected the demand for wellbeing and resilience products, and has it changed the most effective ways to deliver and provide them? So I think, John, do you want to make comment on that first?
Yeah, I think that it has. I think this is my experience in sort of working and creating ideas. I think before the pandemic, people were of course interested in wellbeing, but they thought about it in that more immediate form, and it was always about well-being happening to someone else. And I think what the pandemic has done is made people realise that they've been put under incredible stress and had to work through it. And what I think we've had at Leicester is a response, and the attendance here today shows that people are thinking not only about well-being but the longer term effects of it and how that might be something we carry forward and think about long term, which is why then the things that I've talked about, which is the eudaimonic well-being and the resilience, have very much come into focus now. And there were areas that were talked about before, but I think people have, it's sort of now integrated in their life where they realise that also there isn't so much of a stigma attached to the idea that it's something that happens to all of us now, and it's not something that is part of the environment, and it's not something that it's necessarily something wrong with us, but that these things do happen and that we have to deal with them. So I very much welcome in some ways that engagement, because I think from that we can build in these longer term models that we can then apply to sort of care of the elderly, young people, and building those skills, those trajectories for the future.
Super, thanks for that, John. Do any of the other panelists have a comment on that question? Linda?
Yeah, I think from the conversations that we're having with companies around our product, people are very keen to support people at home. The people who are working from home, that we're recognising there's a real challenge to home working, and whilst there might have been an early indication that productivity was on the increase with people working from home, employers now seem to be very concerned about the impact long term that that's going to have on people working away from the team, being isolated. And, whilst they might economically agree that the best way forward is to have people working from home because they want to reduce their overheads, they then have to think about how they manage that person in terms of their health and well-being. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation.
Lewis, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, James. I was just actually going to want to say one thing. I came on the call about 11 o'clock and I listened intently to Andy, Linda and Peter and thought what great investment pitches. I was clearly waiting for the I want X amount of funding and such time. But actually, in all seriousness, they were excellent pitches. And what we're finding from a pure investment point of view is a little bit like net zero. This is a massively important area of activity. And certainly investors and funders are increasingly looking at the businesses in their own right as really attractive propositions going forwards. And I think that's a reflection of how important the whole issue is at the moment, quite rightly so.
Peter?
Yeah, just one quick analogy. We talk to a lot of corporates, corporate clients across the country, both in the UK and overseas, and everyone still right now is battling with back to the office. And a lot of people are not going to be going back to the office full stop. So from that point of view, as an employer, trying to deal with not only what sort of space do you need, is how do you manage your people effectively if they're working remotely, and that has serious impact on the issues we're talking about. So I think as a sort of as a CEOs of companies or people in leadership roles right now, that they are really grappling with what next year looks like, post-pandemic, if that ever arrives, and how they cope with it and how they structure their businesses to deal with it. So yeah, it's going to be a really challenging time.
Super. Well, that was the first question. The second question, and it's open to all panelists again, is sort of what do you feel are the sort of the next unmet needs in resilience and well-being? Because I think sort of post-COVID, as John has said, there's been a paradigm shift in sort of what people are talking about resilience and well-being more. But what do you feel are the sort of the next unmet needs that sort of maybe just under the surface that could do with being addressed? Any of the panelists? John?
So sorry, I'm not trying to repeat that. Okay, so from my perspective, and it kind of echoes something I was saying to it, but it's the idea that we really need to get to be successful and to build in those key aspects of resilience and well-being, that having those stronger models and not having a proliferal. I mean, I don't mind it's not a problem with variance, and people will create different models to meet their needs, and that's incredibly important to be responsive. But to move away from the idea that there are multitude of different models, and that we begin to sort of have a clear understanding and idea of what are the key things we are, so we can build that. If we have a plethora of things, then we don't really it doesn't really help for the long-term longevity of key ideas and pushing them through and developing them and getting stronger models. I think actually having that evidence base and pushing those forward within people's work is incredibly important for making sure that we guarantee those outcomes, or the best outcomes.
That's true. Peter, and I'll go to Linda.
Yeah, it's a question actually. On Linda's, it's a question to answer a question really. On Linda's presentation, she referred to about over 1 million people right now who are waiting in the treatment pathway. That's people who have been diagnosed. How many more tens of thousands or even millions of people are undiagnosed? And how do we cope with that? Not just as the NHS, but as employers, family. And that's really, for me, is almost a ticking time bomb. As what do we, what solutions are out there? What can we do to try and challenge those numbers and actually improve? Lewis is nodding. I think you agree.
Absolutely agree. Totally agree. Absolutely.
You're on mute, Linda. So I was just going to say, I think there's a real issue on top of the fact that we've got these 1 million people waiting, and then we've also got the NICE guidance that was printed, publicised this week, where we're now saying to GPs, don't medicate, refer someone for treatment, refer them for exercise, refer them for whatever. So we're asking GPs to think very differently. But at the same time, we've got GPs who are signing people off work with low mood. and low mood is not a clinical diagnosis. The worst thing for anybody with low mood is to be isolated from their peer group, not occupied and sitting at home. So there needs to be a real shift in the way that we address this. And I think it's like I said in my presentation, the over-medicalisation of mental health conditions is something that, as a society, I think we struggle with on a day-to-day basis. People are very keen to be medicalised. In private practice, there's me and my 2 therapists that work with me, and we constantly see people who want to be diagnosed with something, when actually it's life getting in the way of them functioning. It's maybe a deficit in terms of a coping strategy, or they may have adopted a poor coping strategy, but they're not actually psychiatrically, mentally ill. And I think there's a real debate that we need to have around that. Sorry, I've just gone off on a tangent.
Andy?
Yes, I was thinking from the point of view of employers and organisations that they don't use well-being and resilience interventions as a smokescreen for the fact that the reason that their employees need the intervention is because the working environment is so toxic, and that's something that we've seen as well, that I don't think we as a group of people who provide these resources don't want to be seen as a sticking plaster, but part of something a bit more sort of structural and systemic.
Super. We've got another question is around sort of, are any of the developments that we've talked about today, and I think that it is specific around sort of physical products. So I know Peter, that the pod is a physical product, and it's Mike from Renfrew Group. But do you see sort of health and well-being and resilience being more products, or services being app-based, or maybe a mixture of the two? Is there in your experience, guys?
I think it's a combination. It's lots of things. I think there's no single answer. There's no magic solution. It's a combination of different approaches that work for you, your business, your family, whatever really. So all we can try and do is create enabling technologies that people can apply.
Super. We've got just a couple more questions, and I think this one's quite interesting actually, and I know there's been a lot of in the national narrative of late around sort of the levelling up and actually health inequalities. But actually, how can you translate sort of well-being and resilience cross-culturally, and also how can you translate that for people with a low health literacy? So are there maybe different ways that you can do that? So if anybody wants to comment, John?
Okay, all right, sorry, yeah. So I do have an answer to that. I did want to jump in. So first of all, one of the so the first thing is that in terms of the health across different cross-cultural, I mean, that's one of the things that I would look back in terms of the evidence and say that's why I've concentrated on those models. It's not to find something that is different, but it's to find the evidence base, and they're the models that there is evidence for how those things operate across culturally, across different countries, across different economic populations, that they're incredibly important in terms of employment, unemployment, looking at scenarios, looking at mental health. So that's why I would choose that, because then they're the ones that have the evidence base. So it's absolutely crucial, and why I would look at the evidence, that you haven't picked out an idea that which seems attractive, but you're actually building these models up from that sort of material. So we would have that validity data. And in terms of the second question, which is health literacy, mental health literacy, absolutely incredibly important. There are a number of things that we've been working on as well, in terms of where we talk about barriers and access and how that varies. And there are models, again, which are well validated, which are well thought through about how we think about mental health literacy in terms of the ability to access, understand, implement mental health in terms of both promotion and addressing issues and understanding that. And we have those models again that we've been working with and developing measures with, which again have got a huge pedigree. I mean, that's where we start from. These aren't new ideas in terms of the literature, but what we have now is the ones that are the best. And there are also things that you can build into that, and we've been doing work for the NIHR are looking at how we look at health literacy and access to services and how that looks in terms of people's attitudes, in terms of the cultural context that they're living in and the acceptance within their cultures, and even things as basically, can they access the service? Are they able to find time to access the service? Are they a distance from the service? And we have packages that we developed that we're using and developing and using with patient populations that look at these levels of literacy, look at those levels of access, attitudes, cultural context that we can apply. So we do have these rehearsed ideas that again have gone through the kind of validation techniques and things like that.
Elizabeth, I saw that you've come off mute, did you?
Yeah. Sorry. I wanted just to comment that although the accent has been given to mental health, resilience, actually mental health in general, has a huge impact on the physical health. And I'm seeing that actually in my clinics. I frequently say that although my clinic is mental health clinic, psychiatry, old age psychiatry clinic, actually turned into a GP practice, because people are referred for depression, for stress, for a cognitive impairment, but they end up with stomach problems, with serious illnesses. The other day I had necrotic fingers all over my clinics, because this is actually the resilience. John comes from from psychology background. I come from very neurobiological background. Actually, for me, resilience equals inflammatory markers. Lower resilience means that my health is suffering. So I would like just to connect those. I used to be a liaison consultant, and there is a well-used sentence: there is no health without mental health. And when I say no health, I think it is the general health. So we have actually to build up on the resilience in order to reduce the impact on our general health. Stroke, cardiovascular diseases are very closely related to loss of resilience or to lower level of resilience. That was just a comment.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Does anybody else have any other comment on that? And then we've just got one more question. I'd actually like to go back to you, Elizabeth, Peter. Just the final question is sort of, what are the main barriers of delivering resilience and wellbeing products to market? Because I know from your talk and the experience with Karthika at Brainberry that dementia is very much an unmet need, and I know myself, my grandmother had it as well, and the true etiology of the disease is still not fully understood. But what do you feel are the main barriers of delivering sort of new products or services to the market?
Well, I think that by the time we start delivering them to the market, it's quite late. That is what my stance, delivering solutions to the market may happen too late for some of my patients. The accent, especially for dementia services, are around prevention. About 35% of dementia apparently can be prevented via lifestyle interventions, stopping drinking, smoking, higher education, building up on resilience, as John said. So in fact, the work that we have done so far indicates that adverse life events, and especially the adult adverse life events, increase the likelihood for dementia, to develop dementia, by nearly threefold, which is huge. And when I say adverse life events, that would be the lower resilience, the stress, the work stress in particular is prominent. So all these devices that we're using or implemented. It's about cognitive stimulation, reprogramming, if we can say, our brain waves to think a little bit different, increasing basically our alpha and beta activity in the brain. And that is the resilience that we should be working on. So, it is also, it's not only the end product, but it is the prevention that we should be thinking about. And we expect that post-COVID, there would be a lot of people who would be coming our way. With long COVID is now the topic, people are thinking about brain fog. For me, brain fog is also the transition between adulthood and old age. We are using brain fog to relate to menopause, perimenopause, andropause. Those are the very key stressful life events. So we should be thinking also about putting the market barriers much sooner, not only when dementia or the health issues become more obvious.
Super. Andy, did you want to make a comment around that?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think if you're committed to launching products that have an evidence base to support that they're safe and effective, that takes time and money. And you might find yourself pipped at the post by competitors who don't really care about evidence. They have lots of big marketing claims, but they don't have any evidence. And I think maybe the people out there with the money to buy these products can be a little bit credulous and they fall for the marketing hype. So I think that can be a barrier. Generating evidence is time consuming and difficult.
Yeah. Now I realise we did have one or two more questions, but I think we've done quite a deep dive into sort of the topic. And I think just as the reflection of the comments that we've, sorry, Elizabeth, did you have a final comment?
No, nothing.
No.
I was thinking about, it takes time. I was thinking about the drugs that are in development. It will usually take 20 to 30 years to reach the market. So in technologically terms, it is much quicker. But I fully agree about the costing. I work with people who cannot afford even the NHS prescription. I just had an email from my secretary saying, can you please write a letter of support for one of our patients? The GPs are charging £30, whereas I will not charge it. So, we are dealing actually with people who cannot afford even the basic expensive. And when I look at the apps, the cheapest one starts around £15 per month prescription, which would be too much for some of my patients who are really in need, for well-being, to management of their stress, to management of their anxiety and depression. So we should be thinking about the economic costing of all of this in order to be embedded in practice and being accepted in general.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I think it just reflects back that the worldview on well-being and resilience is very broad, and it has multiple different angles, and you can look at it from many different lenses. I think I'm just going to conclude the session today. I just do want to just share my screen just for one final time, so that I can signpost that if anybody does have any questions or comments, or just want to get in touch with the LSA, please do write to us on Leicester Innovation at leicester.ac.uk. But I'd also just like to thank all of our speakers today and everybody that has helped in facilitating the session today. I think it's been absolutely brilliant, and I think the topic of resilience and well-being is at the front of everybody's minds, particularly sort of post-COVID. And as we've sort of shown today, it's very wide-ranging, so it can affect people in different ways, both sort of with long COVID brain fog, sort of esteem issues, or actually just managing sort of day-to-day stresses and strains and how we can go about that. But very much so, if anybody on the call today wants further information, or happy to get in contact. But most of all, thank you for today, and hope you've had a great talk. Thank you.